The Association of American Medical Colleges and the Hispanic Serving Health Professions Schools is pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, WebAdmit, What's Next? A best practices discussion. My name is Holly, and it is my pleasure to be the facilitator for today's event. I would like to formally welcome the participants joining us today. Please note today's call is being recorded and will be available online in 3 to 5 business days. All participants' lines will be muted during this broadcast. If you experience technical difficulties with the web portion of today's program, please email aamc@compartners.com or send a message in the chat box. If you are listening to the program over the phone and you need assistance at any time, please press *0 and an operator will assist you. This presentation will last up to 60 minutes and will include question and answer opportunities during the webinar and at the end. You may submit a question at any time by typing it into the chat box in the lower left corner of the screen and clicking the send button. I'd like to direct your attention to the links box on the left side of the screen where resources are located for you to view, save, or print. Simply click on the link of your choice and a separate web browser window will open. This will not interfere with your viewing of the program. It's now my pleasure to introduce Steve Goldbeck, Medical School Engagement Senior Specialist, Rachel Shore, Medical School Engagement Specialist, and Lynn Coward, Director of Admissions, Brody School of Medicine at East Carolina University. At this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Steve.
Thank you, Holly. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us on our webinar, WebAdmit, What's Next? A Best Practices Discussion. As Holly just alluded to, on the call today from the AAMC will be Christine Cooney, Director of Outreach and Engagement, myself, Steve Goldbeck, Medical School Engagement Senior Specialist, Rachel Shore, Medical School Engagement Specialist, and from the Brody School of Medicine at ECU, Lynn Coward, Director of Admissions. As Holly mentioned before, any questions you have throughout this presentation today, please don't hesitate to enter into the chat box on the left-hand side. We will take time for questions at the end, and we will make sure to get every question answered that we can once we reach that point. Here is an agenda for today's call. We are going to start by reviewing the retirement timeline of the AP and the ADI client. We're going to help understand the difficulties of transitioning from a paper process to technology, understanding workflow suggestions. We're going to discuss data integrity and its importance with regards to WebAdmit. We're going to talk about assessment call feedback that we have received. We are also going to go over pulse check survey feedback. We will also, with Lynn Coward, Director of Admissions for Brody School of Medicine at ECU, be doing a user case interview here live on our call today. We will then move on to how WebAdmit is currently working for schools with some examples and some screenshots. And then we will make sure to wrap it up with support information available to anyone who is interested in or currently using WebAdmit for AMCAS. The last piece of our presentation today will be a question and answer session. And again, those questions can be entered into the chat box on the left-hand side of your screen. Let's start by going over a quick retirement timeline review. As many of you know, what was the genesis for WebAdmit was the fact that the AAMC and AMCAS have decided that the AP and ADI client would be retired. That retirement timeline is a two-part timeline, 2 different phases. Phase 1, the AP and ADI client will retire as of May 1st, 2019, which is the start of the 2020 application cycle. School and national reports will remain available through the same portals. Pre-approvals and deadline extensions will also continue, and the ability to access historical application information will still be available per the AMCAS data retention policy, which is, of course, the current cycle and the previous 5 closed cycles. Okay? That does mean that by May 1st of 2019, the start of the 2020 application cycle, you will need to have something in place to process application data from AMCAS because the AP and ADI client will no longer exist. If you are currently using the AP and ADI client for this 2019 application cycle, you will have access to the AP and ADI client through the conclusion of this cycle. There will be no new data to enter into that as of May 1st, 2019. The second phase of the retirement is in regards to the TAMF, DATF files and the EFT site. They will be discontinued at the conclusion of the 2020 application cycle. The AAMC file server, which is how those files are delivered, will also be retired at that time. PDF applications, letter of evaluations, narrative evaluations, any investigation reports, those will all be available through the data exchange service, WebAdmit, or some third-party vendor you're using to process your applications. As you begin to understand and decide how you're going to transition from the AP, we have found several medical schools, as we have talked and had different discussions with them, have focused on two main areas on what they want to be able to do as they transition away. One, making sure they understand their admissions process as fully as possible, and centralizing wherever they transition to, making sure that they can centralize all of their information into one system versus having multiple systems. Most schools will have to determine and understand their transition when it comes to the approaches, whether they will be transitioning from a paper-based process or a software-based process to a new processing tool. The layout of another data system, one piece of advice here is that when you have the layout of data in another system will be different than the AP, but remember that all the data should be there. Okay, as it is with WebAdmit now, it does display differently than it does in the AP, but all of the data is there. This will be a piece you will want to make sure to communicate to your admissions team. If you move to you stand up the data exchange service and move to a different vendor, you will also have to make sure that you understand that all of that data should be there, and you should be able to see it. It just may be in a different display. What we learned from schools who began their transition from the AP this current cycle in the 2019 application year was that the experience of transitioning from paper to technology was one that helped benefit many of the schools in finding better efficiencies in their process, as well as helping them understand the stakeholders and how their process is currently working. What we've done to help in that process is make sure that all schools who are transitioning understand their workflow a little bit better by mapping their admissions process. Okay? What we have found by mapping your workflow or your admissions process is that in our pulse check surveys we've been doing since the launch of WebAdmit, is that one of the top rated, most positive feedback items were from the schools who did map this process out. Helping you along the way, the AMCAS engagement team, the MSR team, myself, Rachel, will be there to help you map your workflow so you can understand exactly where and what steps are in your process, who is involved, and where you can find different efficiencies, whether it's with WebAdmit or another vendor. We offer both on-site and virtual trainings to focus on these workflows as well as the submission process, and we want to make sure that we involve all stakeholders in that. So that requires typically members from both the admissions team as well as the technical staff. Schools that involved both the admissions and technical staff found that they had a better understanding and were able to more quickly work through better efficiencies and how they would implement a new system and transition away from the AP in their admissions process. Seeing the workflow actually mapped out, whether it be on a Word document, whether it be something you've drawn on a flow chart, whether it be something that you just simply put in an Excel spreadsheet. Just by simply seeing it, schools have been able to better understand exactly how much goes into their admissions process from applicant through matriculation and all of the people that are involved. It's also allowed them to understand exactly where they can make changes in their process, where they could help maybe unload some of the overloaded workload to certain stakeholders, or where other people could be involved to help make it more efficient. The AMCAS engagement team will be there to help you through this process, regardless of whether you go with WebAdmit, stand up the data exchange service, and move to a third-party vendor. We want to make sure that all medical schools understand their process as best possible and that you are using any tool provided in the most efficient way. One of the ways we help with that is by providing a sample diagram. Any school that decides to move forward with WebAdmit does get an onboarding kit. Within that onboarding kit, we do go through a process where we actually show you how to map your workflow. Mapping your workflow, we will give you an example diagram where we can show you exactly the roles and responsibilities of the applicant, of the admissions coordinators and assistants, as well as any reviewers, interviewers, or committee members. Okay? What you're able to see when you have a diagram like this and map it out is understanding exactly, one, where and how things move through your admissions process, but also how a new processing tool will integrate with that. This example shows you how you would be able to use an application review process via WebAdmit. Actually, where you would click, how you would do that, if yes, if no, and all of those included. Outside of understanding your workflow, the next area where we heard the most positive results and reviews in those pulse check surveys was the importance of data integrity when it came to application data and what they've become accustomed to receiving from AMCAS. Data will flow from AMCAS to your admissions processing tool via the data exchange service. This is also the case for WebAdmit. The difference between the two is that WebAdmit comes already integrated with the data exchange service and is maintained by AMCAS. If you are to move to a third-party vendor and want to stand up the data exchange service on your own, the AMCAS engagement team will help you with that as well. We will help you understand how you must stand up and maintain the data exchange service and what you need to do to connect that properly to the third-party vendor that you or homegrown system that you may be using. When it came to data integrity, what we found throughout the first part of this cycle is that WebAdmit is the only admissions processing tool that is 100% mapped and built specifically for the AMCAS data structure. Therefore, the data integrity is the only, WebAdmit is the only tool 100% verified to give you the exact same data integrity you receive from AMCAS. This is a quick screenshot so you can see exactly what WebAdmit looks like when you log in each day. This is to give you an idea of how the dashboard is used, where you can see your menu tools on the left-hand side, where you have your dashboards where you can review assignments, interviews, updated applicants, as well as updated status changes. You can also keep good track of the different designations by local status that you've created within WebAdmit. You can also have a dashboard to show where applicants are with regards to admissions actions in your specific school's application process, as well as just simple application status. WebAdmit will give you this tool every time you log in to be able to see exactly where those applications are and where those applicants are moving in your process. It also will give each of your reviewers, committee members, coordinators, IT staff the ability to understand where they need to play a role and what permissions they can have and what they see along the way. To help schools understand better where they need to go with regards to the transition away from the AP and the ADI client, as well as the TAMF and data files in another cycle, the AMCAS engagement team has worked with several medical schools to complete what we call assessment calls. These assessment calls are the first step in this transition. They're interactive exploratory conversations where the engagement team tries to help better understand exactly what the school is currently doing with the AP and the ADI, how they currently use them, what other systems they may be using, understanding where and what their goals are moving forward, and how the AMCAS engagement team can best help them, whether they choose to move forward with WebAdmit or if they plan to be using the data exchange service to interact with their third-party system or their homegrown system. These assessment calls are designed to help make sure that as we move forward from this retirement plan, that all schools have a good understanding of exactly what they need to do and understand the deadlines that come with that. What we found from these assessment calls as we did them last spring and begin to do them again this current fall is that assessment calls gave retirement project clarification for most schools. We did find that there were several schools we spoke to who were not aware of exactly when certain items were retiring on that timeline, and this helped get everyone on the same page. Again, the importance of having all the proper stakeholders on the line. Focusing and understanding the medical school's options, it was a big piece to this, because a lot of schools didn't understand what their options were coming out of this. Didn't have a good understanding of what it would take to set up the data exchange service, didn't understand exactly what WebAdmit could do for them, and these assessment calls help to do that. They also offer a balanced point of view. The AMCAS engagement team is going to make sure that whatever solution works best for that school's process and that school's items is what we want to make sure we provide to that school in terms of support. And now what I'd like to go ahead and do is actually turn this over to Rachel Shore, who will be giving us some updates and some feedback that we received on our bi-monthly pulse check surveys.
Thanks so much, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. As Steve mentioned, we are extremely excited about WebAdmit and also extremely interested in hearing feedback from our WebAdmit users as we build our roadmap. With that in mind, we started offering bi-monthly surveys to check in with our WebAdmit users to learn more about their experience performing cycle-specific activities within WebAdmit and understand where there could be areas of improvement. We sent surveys so far in August and October to our super users at WebAdmit participating institutions, and we have another survey slated for the beginning of December. Next slide, please. Our August Pulse Check survey focused on the list manager, applicant gateway, and work groups. The respondents found that our trainings, webinars, and one-on-one support were the most helpful elements with preparing for the launch of WebAdmit. Most of the challenges that were noted centered around acclimating to a new system and adjusting their school-specific process to a different software, but overall, respondents viewed WebAdmit favorably. Next slide, please. Our October Pulse Check survey centered on the interview process, multi-mini interviews, and early decision programs. Not all schools use WebAdmit currently for their MMI process or early decision program. They are continuing to incorporate WebAdmit into their specific interview processes and procedures, but the majority found the benefit of having all of their data in one centralized location and had positive experiences with liaison support along the way. WebAdmit has continued to receive positive ratings overall as schools continue to use WebAdmit and adjust and acclimate more to the new system. We will continue to monitor feedback and take in users' responses as we build out our roadmap and look to using WebAdmit and incorporating it further in the next admission cycle. We're now going to turn it over to Lynn Coward, Director of Admissions, Brody School of Medicine at East Carolina University, to share her experience.
Hello, folks. So Steve has asked me to discuss 3 different areas about our experience with WebAdmit. So the first thing that I'd like to discuss is why we decided to move to WebAdmit, and that decision for our program was really a no-brainer. I've been around a long time in admissions, and I remember processing before we even had the AP. And over the years, I've developed a great working relationship with AMCAS, and they've always been there. I've watched as the AP improved every cycle, and I just feel like the AMCAS listens to our concerns. They want our feedback, and we always have their support. So their recommendation to WebAdmit was a very easy decision for us to make. When the opportunity came up last fall to adopt it for the 2019 processing cycle, there really wasn't any question for us. I wanted us to get in at the ground level, and it's not perfect. There are a lot of good things about WebAdmit. There's some kinks that still need to be worked out, but again, I feel like that the folks at AMCAS listen to us, and WebAdmit folks are great about talking to you and working through problems, so that has really worked out well. The second thing that I was asked to discuss was about our experiencing the implementation of WebAdmit into our processes. Well, that's been challenging, to be perfectly honest. I have found that when our office is forced to make changes for whatever the case may be, it gives us great reasons and opportunities to review and update our different processes. In the last 5 to 6 years, we've changed how we do things. The biggest changes, we have tried to go completely electronic. And so we don't use snail mail to communicate at all with our applicants any longer. All of our interactions with them is through email, which has saved us a tremendous amount of dollars during the last few years. And, of course, this cycle we've started using WebAdmit in conjunction with Access and Adobe Acrobat. We use those for our reports. We use SharePoint. I call it my electronic filing cabinet. And finally, our records are eventually entered into Banner, where that system houses our student records. The biggest hurdle that we're facing now is getting a successful interface between Banner and WebAdmit built with our IT department. This cycle we still use the Tamif load in the Banner, which has worked well for us since it started. And so the best word to describe it, this application cycle for us has just been changes. The last thing that I was asked to discuss was how WebAdmit has added the most value to our admissions processes. For those of you that haven't started or are not using WebAdmit right now, this probably won't make sense, but for those of you that do, it is absolutely amazing to us how much time you actually save when you don't have to press the save button every time you make a change. It's just amazing that such a little change like that can make a big difference in the amount of your processing time. The positive of WebAdmit certainly outweigh the negatives. Some of the things that my employees here in our office, as well as myself, that we have come to love with the WebAdmit features are the dashboard feature. Tracking applicants is so much easier than it was in the AP. The email tracking system, confirmation that our applicants are actually getting those emails. That's wonderful to be able to tell an applicant that, you know, we did see that you received that and opened that email. The applicant portal, that was a little headache to start off with, but being able to customize our supplemental application and our collecting documents, the prerequisites, the competencies, they all work out. They're working what I consider to be really well for the first time. And the collecting the fee, we used TouchNet to collect our fees this year. The interview and the file review setups in WebAdmit, we're using that, and that process seems to be going a lot faster this year. And another wonderful feature of WebAdmit that we've enjoyed is the clipboard. And it sounds like I'm really selling it. We will be using it next year. Our office as a whole, we're very satisfied with it. If any of the programs that are thinking about making the switch, if you want to talk to me personally, you're welcome to get my contact information and contact me outside the webinar. Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn, for your time today. We really appreciate you giving us that feedback and taking part in this webinar today. I really appreciate it. We will go over a couple different ways for anyone that wants to reach out to Lynn. We'll make sure to go over that towards the end of the webinar. So again, I'd like to thank you, Lynn, for taking the time. Where we're going to go next is going to talk a little bit about how some of the best practices and the ways that WebAdmit works in terms of the feedback we've received from schools who are using WebAdmit for the 2019 cycle. One of the big pieces that we heard from schools that are using WebAdmit for the 2019 cycle is that it is giving them a much more complete and transparent view of applicants. As you can see here, this is really what an applicant will look like when you click into that applicant. It is going to give you all of the AMCAS information and then some more within an entire view. There are several tabs. It's customizable as to how many tabs you have open versus closed. You cannot move those tabs around. I'll make sure to say that because that is one of the questions that has come in many times. But you do have the ability to open the tabs that you want to have open. You can limit the amount of tabs that you want your screeners or your interviewers or your committee members to see. You can leave them all open for everyone to see. You can access the full PDF application through here, all of the letters of evaluation, any of their applicant gateway activities like their supplemental questions. This is going to give you the most centralized view that you can have. This is something that our users have really come to enjoy about WebAdmit because they can go to one simple place to get all of their information in one simple spot. The next feature that is very key to WebAdmit, and you heard Lynn allude to there, she uses many different systems to keep track because they are moving to a completely digital, no papered process in their office. There are several schools in medical admissions that are moving towards that and getting towards that process. And to do so, that is going to require the ability for WebAdmit to integrate. WebAdmit does have a REST-based API, both export and import. I can give you the information for that, where if you were to go to developer.webadmit.org, you would actually be able to pull up all of the WebAdmit API documentation, as well as all the processes you need to go through to connect WebAdmit to different payment vendors, to your different reporting databases, to different student information systems. That's where we've really seen the biggest connectivity, is the student information systems between PeopleSoft and Banner and Slate and all of those. So it does have the capability to interact and actually tie up together with them. Probably one of the most used pieces of WebAdmit that we did not see coming, quite frankly, was the use of the PDF application, the PDF manager within WebAdmit. So everyone is familiar with the ability to access and see the full PDF application, which gives you all of the information from the AMCAS application. What you also have the ability to do within WebAdmit, and has become probably one of, if not the most popular feature within WebAdmit, is the PDF manager. This actually gives you the ability to construct a PDF of only the information that is important to you at that time in your process. We have schools that create a different PDF for pre-screening, who then create a different PDF for their interviewing, who then have another PDF for their final committee review. PDF Manager allows you to do all of that. What you see here is an example of the first page of the PDF. The reason that I pulled this up, and the reason I wanted to make sure to go through this particular page and display it, is the fact that you can see, as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, that while all of the data is there, it will display differently than what you're used to within the AP. Okay? The summary page that you received within the AP is no longer there. It starts right out of the gate with the personal information. It will break down, and it is color-coded. It's not just blue like you see here on the screen. It is color-coded per section. So if you're going down through the PDF onto multiple pages, you can actually see, you'll have a good idea based on color as to when sections end, when personal information ends and education history begins, or when experiences begin as well. The beautiful part about WebAdmit and how several schools have brought it to us is that this is, it has echoed Lynn's statement that this has been they've been really pleased and are looking forward to using it into 2020 because it's a great start for our platform. And the reason we say it's a great start is because we do have several enhancements on board, and we are constantly working with Liaison to build this. Okay, there's a lot of conversation with schools around WebAdmit and how it is different from the other WebAdmit CASs they've seen on their campus. Those other WebAdmit CASs on their campus are built with the same, very similar foundation and legs that WebAdmit for AMCAS is, but we have spent the last 3 years customizing this to the medical admissions process. Okay, so that doesn't just stop with this launch in 2019. We are going to continue to move forward with that. We're going to continue to work with Liaison to make enhancements and improvements from the feedback we hear from our medical school community. That's why things like the pulse check surveys we send out to adopters are important to get completed. That's why we have different communities and support communities like the WebAdmit listserv. So what you'll see here on this screen is the different support available to you. If you are a WebAdmit user, there is a dedicated WebAdmit for AMCAS support team at Liaison. They are there for you via phone or via email. As I tell everyone that is using WebAdmit, if you were to go in and use, if you are going to reach out to support, whether you're having access to the test site for WebAdmit or whether you're in the live system, if it's something that you need an answer to right now, make that phone call. If it is something that you can wait to get a response back on, that's what you would use the email for. They are very good about getting back within the time period that they tell you when they send you back the email that they've got your ticket. But that's just the differentiate between those two. Schedule a consult call. Scheduling a consult call, an assessment call, or an in-person training by reaching out to Medical School Relations. Okay, so this is going to tie into that assessment call feedback that we gave. If you have questions about the data exchange service or about WebAdmit, please make sure to reach out to Medical School Relations, which is at schoolrel@aamc.org, to set up that time and that call so that we can make sure to get you on the right path for transition when the AP and ADI are no longer available as of May 1st, 2019. You can also view WebAdmit resources at the WebAdmit page on the AAMC's website. That link is there. Again, remember, to the left-hand side under the links, the presentation slides are there. This, of course, will also be recorded so that you have that so you can use those links. And then there's the WebAdmit listserv. As I talked about before, Lynn you can reach out to directly by going to her school's website and pulling up her email and sending her an email directly if you'd like. I'm sure her phone number is on there as well. But what you can also do is reach out and become a member of the WebAdmit listserv. You can reach out to me directly or to Medical School Relations and ask to be added to the WebAdmit listserv, where you can begin conversations with current users of WebAdmit, people who are interested within WebAdmit. Okay, so you can feel free to use those on under the support tab. What I'll go ahead and do now is hand it back over to Holly before we jump into any questions and hand it off to her.
Thank you. Let's take some questions from our audience. As a reminder, to enter a question through the web conference system, please type your question in the chat box in the lower left corner of the window and click on Send. I'll turn it back over to Rachel for our first question.
Thanks, Holly. The first question is, how does WebAdmit get data from AMCAS?
That's a great question. Thank you, Rachel. So WebAdmit is integrated with AMCAS through the data exchange service. Okay, so the difference between just the standard data exchange service and data exchange service that connects WebAdmit is that the data exchange service that provides information to WebAdmit, while is exactly the same in terms of structure and what it is for a third-party vendor, is maintained strictly by AMCAS and the integration we've built with Liaison and WebAdmit for AMCAS. Okay. The standard data exchange service that is not, if you decide not to move forward with WebAdmit, is going to be something that you would stand up on your own and we would help you to support throughout the process.
Thanks, Steve. The next question is, will my admissions action report be reported back to AMCAS if I use a third party?
So yes, so your third party, as long as it is an admissions processing tool for WebAdmit, that is part of what they will work with when they are working their connection with the data exchange service. That is something they're going to have to get connected with and something they'd be able to use to report back via the data exchange service.
Thanks, Steve. Next question is, what are some third-party application services that other schools are using?
So some third-party, I assume they mean third-party admissions processing tools. There is the AMP product, I believe, by Zap. That is one. There is Slate. There is CollegeNet. Those are just some of the few that I know. I know there's some homegrown systems that some have built, so I'm sure I'm missing a couple there, but those would probably be the primary ones outside of WebAdmit.
what are some of the benefits of setting up the data exchange service versus switching to WebAdmit?
So some of the, what I would say are some of the benefits would actually be based on a specific school's scenario and setup. Okay, and what I mean by that is that if you have the technical resources, the financial resources, the financial resources.
Yeah, I signed back in. I'm on my phone.
Oh, sorry about that.
Sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
Yes. So it depends on whether you have the financial resources, the technical resources, as well as the manpower resources to stand up the data exchange service. And where that would provide you the benefit is that you would be in control of maintaining and owning the flow of data between AMCAS and your third-party vendor, because the data exchange service, if stood up on its own, is 100% maintained, updated, and managed by that specific school. So if you have the resources to do that, that's where you would start to see the benefits. What we've seen from several schools, and not all schools are in that scenario, where they have the ability to have that manpower, those technical resources to stand up and maintain something like the data exchange service. That's one of the reasons WebAdmit is so attractive to them, because it's not something they have to worry about maintaining on a technical side.
Thanks, Steve. We have a couple questions now about the PDF Manager. The first one is, does the PDF Manager apply to the data exchange service calls?
I would probably ask to get a little more clarification on that as to what exactly they're asking there in terms of the calls. So the PDF Manager pulls data points that are in WebAdmit. Okay, so the PDF Manager is a specific feature tied to WebAdmit, and it will pull any data point within WebAdmit. So you can pull any data point out into that, and so anything that is going to be communicated back to AMCAS, you'll be able to pull in there, all via WebAdmit. Hopefully that answers their question, unless they send something, unless they send some further clarification.
Thanks, Steve. That was great. Is the PDF Manager available in the test environment?
The PDF Manager is available in the test environment. You do have the ability to go into the test environment, so any school that still isn't quite sure if they want to move over to WebAdmit, I would encourage you to schedule an assessment call so we can talk about that and maybe see about getting you access to our test environment. But that test environment, it is going to give you the ability to go ahead and test out the PDF Manager, be able to build with your test data that is in there. The one key to remember about the test environment is that's exactly what it is, a test environment. None of that information can come out of there, so nothing you build will come out and go into a live system or anything like that.
Can you also provide a bit more clarification about where exactly the PDF Manager is located currently in the test environment?
So in the test environment on the left-hand side, so what I can do is show you here. Give me 1 second, I'll jump back to that slide for everyone. Back at the beginning here. There we go. Okay, so this was the dashboard I showed you earlier. So on the left-hand side, what you'll see here under the Reports and Exports tab, underneath the word, it's actually underneath, it's under the Report Manager. There'll actually be another tab here that says PDF Manager. If this is someone asking a question who has access to the test environment, what I would ask is that you make sure that you are in the 2019 test environment, not the 2018 test environment.
Thanks, Steve. What was the website that lists compatible systems for import and export?
Sure, so they're talking about the API documentation. So it's not going to talk about the specific systems as much as it's going to give you the API documentation from WebAdmit. And that website is developer.webadmit.org. Okay, and that will take you to that information. What you then have to find out is whatever systems you are thinking about integrating, you will need to get in contact with that system to understand if they accept the API, the export API from a system like WebAdmit with that documentation.
Thank you. We've had a couple questions about whether the slides and presentation will be available. Yes, they will be available on the AMCAS website about a week from now, so please keep your eyes out from there. We will send out an email communication when the recording and the slides will be posted, so feel free to wait for that in the coming week. The next question is it true that we can't add attachments to emails sent out through WebAdmit?
I'm sorry, could you read that one more time?
Sure. Is it true that we cannot add attachments to emails sent out through WebAdmit?
That is a great question, and the answer is yes, that is accurate as it is in its current form right now. The ability to add attachments to emails is an enhancement that is already under development and will be available for the 2020 application cycle.
How are advanced filters used in WebAdmit, and how is preliminary and unverified data presented in WebAdmit?
Another great question. One of the things that I'd like to show is kind of to draw your attention here back to the slides, the dashboard here that I showed you. I have put a little arrow down here to show you designations by application status. This is how, if you were a school that receives preliminary data, you will be able to see the difference between received and verified applications. Received applications being that preliminary data unverified applicants will actually show here where it says received, and it'll give you a number of how many you have in there. The verified will be your current verified applications and applicants that you can then process through. In terms of advanced filters, this is a great question from someone who I know uses the AP. You will have to shift your verbiage a little bit now and use what we call the list manager. And that's here under applicant lists. The list manager will act the same as advanced filters within WebAdmit versus the AP. The list manager is where you could go in and you can sort and search for applicants based on application data, different fields, different information. You can separate them out as far as you could do something, you could filter out all the applicants that are from, have a legal state of residence in Maryland, who have an MCAT score above a certain score and have an overall GPA higher than 3.5. You can create that list, see all of those applicants, and then from there actually be able to take bulk action, whether that's send them a secondary application, schedule them for an interview, send them an email. So hopefully that answers that for you, but that's where you would find that capability within WebAdmit versus the AP. One thing I would like to add, Rachel, just to jump back to what you had pointed out before, yes, the slides will be available in all the ways that Rachel stated, but also on the left-hand side of this presentation right now, if you look under the Links tab, if you open that up, you'll actually see that the presentation slides are there. You can actually open those presentation slides and save them for yourself there.
Thanks so much for the clarification, Steve. Yes, the recording, if you want to listen to us, that'll be available next week. Sorry for the confusion there. The next question is, when incorporating new items or services into WebAdmit based on the school's needs, how flexible would it be? Would it be tailored to that one school, or would every school have to use the same template?
So that's a great question. When the AAMC and AMCAS decided that we were going to retire the AP, and we settled on working with Liaison to create WebAdmit for AMCAS. We wanted to create a tool that was a centralized tool for all medical schools to be able to use so that they had all of their verified data right in one place and could manage that from applicant all the way through matriculation. Therefore, the ability to create a completely 100% customizable to each school product would not have been a part of that. Okay, so that wouldn't have been a part of that. There are some customizations you can make in terms of the different filters that you use. The local statuses you create for your process are specific only to your school. The way in which you manage interviews, the way that you set up your applicant gateway for secondary applications, collecting fees and all of that is completely customized and specific to your school. But the template, like the dashboard you see here, looks the same for every school. Okay, that is what you get with WebAdmit when you go there. What I can tell you, the one thing, and what I think is probably one of the more important pieces, that is 100% customized to any school that moves forward with WebAdmit is the training and support that you receive. So any school that moves forward with WebAdmit will have an in-person visit from me where we will go through and actually help map out the process, as we talked about earlier, and the workflow of your admissions process. And then from there, we will tailor how WebAdmit can work specifically for your school. Okay, that may mean that there are certain portions of WebAdmit that you may not use because they don't fit into your process, and it would just be either overkill or doesn't fit your process, and that's okay. There's over 150 some odd medical schools at this time, and there's over 150 some odd admissions processes out there. We will make sure to do the training, the learning, the education, completely tailored to what's important to your admissions process. But the tool itself will have the same bones as everybody else.
One question we have says, I have noticed that the applicant's transcript is not part of the complete PDF application. Is the transcript not uploaded?
So the electronic transcript is a part of the applicant. When you go in there, you can see the electronic transcript. If you were to build a PDF, you do have the ability to select the electronic transcript to be a part of it. So you can create a PDF that has that in there. So you do have that capability. And one thing that actually Lynn was so great to just remind me of in terms of customization for schools, to go back to that last question real quick, is you do have the ability to create custom fields for specific data points that may not be captured within WebAdmit. So maybe, a student ID number or certain scoring that you use outside in a separate interview model or whatever that might be. You do have the ability to create custom fields within WebAdmit to really have it be the information specific to your school. But to come back to that location where you are now, to the question that you just asked, Rachel, yes, you can create a PDF with the electronic transcript in there. The electronic transcript is under each individual applicant, so you do have access to that and can create a PDF with that.
Thanks, Steve. We have a couple questions now about school tools and the AP. This question asks, when you say that the AP will still be available to run reports, does that mean the mail merge feature will still work?
So the AP tab, so what is retiring? This is a great question, so it helps to kind of clarify. The AP tab within School Tools will cease to exist in all of its functions as of May 1st, 2019. So anything that you do under that AP tab will no longer be available for you to use. Any other tab you're using within School Tools will still be available to you. You'll still be able to access it. It's just the AP tab and its functionality that's going away. With that being said, within WebAdmit as well, and with most admissions processing tools, but I know specifically within WebAdmit, you have the ability to send emails through that as well. So you can do that mail merge, send out and create email templates through WebAdmit to specific applicants or groups of applicants at a time.
Thanks, Steve. Another question is, how long will the reports, school or national, be available?
School and national reports will be available as they always have been. That, again, that goes back to kind of the same thing we talked about before, which is it's only the AP tab that is going away there. All of those reports will be the same for you as the same way you've accessed them before. None of that is changing with regards to the retirement of the AP and the ADI client.
We have a couple questions about preparing for the 2020 cycle. Will the WebAdmit test environment be available prior to the 2020 cycle? Will it be updated to reflect our 2019 setups, lists, exports, etc.? So
there is a 2019, or there is a test environment that is available. The test environment you can get access to. If you are already a 2019 adopter, you should already have access to that. If you do not, please reach out to me immediately and I'll make sure to try and figure out why that's not the case. But the test environment is specifically that, a test environment. Nothing you do in the test environment will roll over to a live environment. It does reflect all of the features and everything that are within WebAdmit as it stands right now, but it is filled with test data and dummy data. So it won't reflect anything you've built. If you're a 2019 adopter, your test environment will not reflect everything you've built in your live system because they don't talk to one another. If you are someone who is considering for 2020 and you'd like to have test access, like I said, you want to reach out to SchoolRel and Medical School Relations and make sure that you set up an assessment call with myself and one of the Medical School Relations reps, so that we can get a good understanding of what you're thinking, kind of where things are, to understand what's going to be the best solution for you. And then once we set that up and we get you access to that test environment, you'll have the ability to play around and kind of see what WebAdmit looks like. But again, none of that information will transfer over if you decide to move forward to the 2020 cycle. It'll just be a test environment.
Another question, we will still need to be able to send admissions actions like interviewed, accepted, and matriculated statuses via the AAMC website, or will that process look different?
So great question. In terms of, I'll talk about it in two different ways. In terms of WebAdmit, you know, the way that you would move forward with that, and I'll kind of put a new red arrow here, is where you see here on the dashboard designations by decision codes. Decision codes in WebAdmit are, as you'll notice, is a list of 12 admissions actions, okay? So all those admissions actions that you talk to, you will tie those admissions actions to a local status that is identifying a step in your process. When you select that local status that is tied to that admissions action, it will automatically report that admissions action back to AMCAS. So that's how that process will work. It's very simple. It's very automated once you get it set up, that you don't have to worry about it. It'll just automatically do it once it's set up and built. In terms of using a homegrown system or a third-party system, you will have to work with those vendors to make sure that they can send admissions actions back through the data exchange service once you've set that up. So that's how you'll do it.
Thanks, Steve. We have a couple more specific questions. Just to ask about, again, about the data exchange service. What is included or not included with the PDF call from the data exchange service?
So again, I'll go kind of like two different answers here, right? So WebAdmit, with WebAdmit, the PDF Manager and the full PDF application are all part of the transmission from AMCAS into WebAdmit. So there's nothing you have to worry about there. It's all just presented to you. It's there. You build it. You do it. You can pull it as you need to. With regards to just standing up the data exchange service, not going with WebAdmit and going with a third-party vendor or a homegrown system, that is something you'd have to work with your vendor or homegrown system on how they're going to display that. That is not something that we would be responsible. We would transmit all of the data that would be necessary for it through the data exchange, but the way that it's processed and able to be viewed for human eyes is all dependent on that vendor or your homegrown system.
Thanks, Steve, for providing that extra clarification.
Mm-hmm.
Another point of clarification regarding mail merge functioning is this school says we currently use it to retrieve accepted students' mailing addresses. Is there a way that this can be illustrated in WebAdmit?
Can you say that one more time for me, please?
Sure. The mail merge function is pertinent for this school because they use it to collect mailing addresses. We currently use it to retrieve accepted students' mailing addresses, and they wanted to know how this could be illustrated in WebAdmit.
So within WebAdmit, you have the ability, understanding a little bit better now what they meant by mail merge. WebAdmit is a cloud-based software and web-based for you to have access anywhere that you have internet connection. And it is not, at this time, it's focused more on what would be an email merge versus a mail merge. There is no capability currently within WebAdmit to collect addresses to send out a mail merge. So that functionality is not available within WebAdmit.
Thanks for providing those extra details.
Mm-hmm.
We do not have any other questions at this point, but we can pause for a minute to see if anyone else wants to add in a few last questions before we conclude the webinar.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like we are done with questions. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time and being a part of the webinar today and listening in. We will go ahead and hand this over to Holly to close this out now. Thank you all again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. And with that, we must conclude today's program. Please click on the webinar evaluation link in the links box on the left side of your screen to give us your feedback on today's presentation. This session has been recorded and will be available within 3 to 5 business days. You may access the recorded archive by using the same login information you used for today's live webinar. On behalf of the Association of American Medical Colleges, thank you to our speakers and, of course, all of today's participants. Have a good afternoon. You may now disconnect.